All right. Probably it's going to be the best if you go ahead and turn to this week's Torah portion. It's Beha'alotcha, Numbers 8:1 through 12:16. All right. So the name Beha'alotcha comes from the sixth word of the second verse of the parsha. God tells Moses to tell Aaron Beha'alotcha. He says, when you light. He's talking about when you light the menorah. The menorah shall give light in front of the menorahs. There's a lot of interesting things happening in this parsha. And in my opinion, there's one element that makes it really good for this annual teaching, or maybe even like a quarterly teaching. It's something that we have to constantly be reminded of. And actually, last year during this parsha, Elder Miguel did the same concept that I'm going to be pulling out. And it is a great reminder. So the chapter and the subjects that I'm referring to, I like to call the wilderness grumblings. All right, and it's the last two chapters of the parsha. You see in chapter 11, you see the people, all the people get infected with sort of this grumbling spirit. And then in chapter 12, it's more about Miriam and Aaron and how they come and they're grumbling about Moses. All right, so I think the way I want to approach this is pretty surface level. I know Josh is teaching the message today, and it's going to be pretty deep. Like my Israeli friend, I study Torah with this Israeli guy every week, and he says, "Oh, we're going deep. You better grab your snorkel." And I haven't had the heart to tell him that the snorkel, you can only go a little deep, you know. But for this one, you might just need your flippers, all right? Where you just kind of stroll through it, really. And I was thinking maybe a little bit of a case study on this instance. And to do that, I kind of want to go through a list of things in this way. First, we'll talk about the context of the situation, identify some of the surface problems, right? The way that the root problem manifests, and then we'll talk a little bit about the root problem. Then we'll identify Moses' response to the problem. Then we'll identify God's response to the problem. And then finally we'll see how we can sort of apply it in our lives. So the context, we're going to start just at the very beginning of the parsha. Not the beginning of the parsha, the beginning of chapter 11. So if you're looking, go to Numbers 11:1, and I'll start reading there. So the people were murmuring in the ears of Adonai about the hardship. And when Adonai heard, his anger burned, and the fire of Adonai blazed among them, ravaging the outskirts of the camp. And the people cried out to Moses, so Moses prayed to Adonai, and the fire died out. And the name of that place was called Taberah, because the fire from Adonai burned among them. The grumblers among them began to have cravings. And so Bnei Israel began to wail repeatedly, saying, "If we could just eat some meat. We remember the fish that we used to eat in Egypt for free, and the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But now we have no appetite. We never see anything but this manna." So the context of the situation, they're complaining about the food. And then actually the next four verses, right, going from 7 to 11, talk about the manna. It's the description of the manna, so we'll put that in context. We'll read it as well. Verse 7. Now the manna was similar to coriander seed, and it had an appearance like a gum resin. And the people went about, and they gathered it up, and they ground it in a hand mill, or they crushed it in a mortar. They cooked it in a pot, or made it into cakes. And it had a taste something like something made with olive oil. And when the dew descended on the camp at night, the manna descended with it. All right, so a quick summary of what we've looked at so far. Some people were murmuring, and potentially this is two different groups. The ones mentioned in verse 4 are specifically, you can get from the Hebrew words that they're talking about individuals from the mixed multitude. And the way it describes their murmurings, in Hebrew it says they had a desire to have a desire. And in one of the Jewish translations of the Bible, it says they sought a pretext to complain. So I think that they just wanted to complain because it felt right. In a way, that's one way to put it. They had a desire to desire. All right? But this then bleeds into the overall group, and it has an effect on all of Israel, and other ones began to join in. So it really spread. It infected the whole group. And whenever the grumbling had started, God had dealt with those people by consuming them with fire, but obviously the lesson wasn't learned by everyone, and as it spread, everyone began grumbling, and it was pretty significant, and the intensity with which the grumbling was happened reached an absolute fever pitch. All right, it says, we'll read that, Numbers 11:10. Moses heard the people wailing by their families, each man at the door of his tent, and Adonai's anger became very hot, and Moses was troubled. So what are the elements that led to the grumbling spirit within the camp? And what caused them to mature to the point to where all the families are wailing, each man at the door of his tent? Now, you could say it was the menu, but I think that's actually incorrect. This is the excuse, right? Anybody that wants to complain, they often have something to point out. Well, this is why I'm complaining. But a lot of times, you'll see that it's actually a deep-rooted heart problem. Yeah. So, and possibly you've heard the apologetic theory concerning the manna, that it was some sort of natural explained phenomena of some bush that would express some sort of resin out of its leaves, or anyways, I utterly reject that one. Some apologetics I'm okay with. That one I believe is completely false. It reduces the miracle of God and what He promised to some sort of natural phenomenon that could happen anytime, and I don't believe that happened. Also, I reject it because King David in Psalm 78, 23 and 24 says this. He refers to it as the corn of heaven, and he also calls it angel's food. And then there's a lot of rabbinic commentary that I've looked at concerning manna. It suggests it was the most delicious food known to man, and that it had this mystical thing to it that whoever was eating it, it would take on the flavor of their most favorite food. And then the pure form of it could just be picked up and eaten like bread. But as good as it was, it seems that it became boring to them because they sought some reason to complain against it. And they would grind it. It says they ground it in a mill, and they crushed it in a mortar. They cooked it in a pot, or they made it into cakes. All right, so this processing, you can see, is completely unnecessary, but there's sort of a parallel I've seen like with my kids, right? Have you ever dealt with bored kids or kids that claim to be bored, right? It's usually when life is good that this boredom kicks in, right? Like the school's done, the chores are done, the homework's done. And one time I walk into a room in my house, and there's all these little pieces of paper that are like torn up laying on the floor. I'm like, what in the world is this? Why did you do this? I was bored. And when my kids do it, I call it attention-seeking self-sabotage. Right? And it has not happened very often. I got to give my kids credit. It doesn't have, because like God did to the first group of grumblers, I burned the outskirts of the camp, if you know what I mean. So the children of Israel are actually just that in this instance. They're children. And actually, they didn't have the responsibility level developed to deal with freedom appropriately. So now, the following is just my hypothesis, actually. But I think that they thought in their mind, well, if God can make water appear, if God can provide light, if He can provide shade, if He can make this amazing food just fall out of the sky, why can't we just have everything we want? In fact, I think they thought, you know what, if we just complain enough, we can get it. We can get it. We can get whatever we want if we just complain enough. And like the children parallel just works too good, like, because if you think to maybe a time you were shopping or whatever, and there's the kid in the checkout line, or maybe it was your kid. I mean, it has been my kid once or twice that wants the thing there by the register, right? As you're checking out, there's either some toy or there's some candy bar, and they're throwing a fit because they want it. Well, if this is allowed to continue too much, right? Once in a while it might be okay, but they learn that this works, and I think that the children of Israel kind of had this same premonition or same reasoning, and they learned it to work. Children are born inherently very self-centered. We have to work pretty hard to train that out of them during those first few years. And unless you train it out of them, they actually get better at being self-centered, but with a higher cognition level, so they're better at coercing parents and other people out of what they want. And this is what Moses is dealing with, like self-centered children, but with this higher functioning ability to be ultra-manipulative. Right? And self-centeredness is pretty closely aligned to these two other negative qualities that I think of, which are envy, which envy is, it says, well, I want that, and then greed, which says, I want more. And if you ponder these three things for a little while, you realize that they develop a stronghold where your entire purpose for living becomes pointed in the wrong direction. It's pointed at yourself, and it's not pointed at God. And then once it's fully developed and ingrained into a person and the way they think, there's no amount of appeasement that is ever enough. But 80-year-old Moses is dealing with several million plus babies in the grocery store checkout line. And then let's look at how he handles it. All right, this is Numbers 11:11. So Moses asked Adonai, "Why have you brought trouble on your servant? Haven't I found favor in your eyes, that you laid the burden of all this people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give birth to them, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom, just as the nurse carries an infant to the land that you promised to their fathers? Where can I get meat for all these people? For they wail to me, saying, give us meat. I am not able to carry all these people by myself. The load is too heavy for me. If this is how you are treating me, kill me now. If I have found favor in your eyes, kill me, please. Don't let me see my own misery." Moses didn't take it well. And I don't know that we could blame him. I mean, maybe a little bit of the self-focus got rubbed off into him. I really don't think that. I think he was just overwhelmed by this, and this was meant to happen so we could have this learning thing from it. And I think actually Moses' real concern is not for himself. I believe it's for the people. And he's wondering, and he feels like he's failing at being able to train these millions of people how to love God. And he knows he can't do that himself. So Moses, the most humble man to have lived, was chosen to establish a culture of righteousness, and in this couple of million people freed, right, from a self-serving pagan nation, and he's overwhelmed with the task. But God hears the cry of Moses, and he takes both sympathy for him, and he takes anger and judgment against these group of complainers and grumblers. He gives Moses this two-pronged corrective approach. One, he's going to give the people more teachers so that all the weight of this doesn't fall on Moses. And then two, he's going to give the people exactly what they are asking for, but he's going to show them and teach them, because he's going to make it poisonous to the ones that were the most egregious in the grumblings and the complainings. All right, but notice that he assigns the elders first, and he gives them this supernatural ability of prophecy. He puts his spirit on them, and they begin to prophesy. I don't know exactly what they prophesy, but I believe it has something to do with the punishments that's going to be coming from the grumbling. And I believe that, and I think that because I think it fits in with what we know about how God corrects people. He usually sends a prophet, like think about Jonah. He sends a prophet to tell them what's going to happen. And the second approach that he gives, I call it the whole pack approach. Does anybody not know what I'm talking about when I say the whole pack approach? Okay, so back in the day, this would probably be child abuse now, but if you were to catch your kid smoking a cigarette, then you would take and be like, you want to do that? All right, the whole pack now. All right, and what would happen is it becomes poison and toxic in their system at that level. Their face usually turns green after 2 or 3, and they start vomiting, and you never want to touch it again after that, all right? You take so, yeah, ideally. So this is the whole pack approach. All right, and so let's just read through, since we're going through pretty much this whole chapter, we'll read through starting in 11:16. Adonai said to Moses, "Bring me 70 of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be elders of people and their leaders. Take them to the tent of meeting so that they may stand with you there. Then I will come down and I will speak with you there, and I will take some of the Ruach, which is the Spirit that is on you, and I will place it on them. And they will carry with you the burden of the people, so that you will not be carrying it alone. Now to the people say, sanctify yourselves for tomorrow, because you will eat meat. For you wailed in Adonai's ear, saying, if only we could eat meat. It was better for us in Egypt. Now Adonai will give you meat to eat, and you will eat. You will eat, not for 1 day, or 2 days, or 5 days, or 10 days, or 20 days, but for an entire month, until it is coming out of your nostrils, and it becomes loathsome to you. For you rejected Adonai who is among you, and you wailed to his face, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? All right, so do you see the two approaches that I was sort of describing there? All right, now let's skip down to 33, verses 33 and 34, and see how the meat eating turned out for them. Yet, while the meat was still between their teeth, before it was swallowed, Adonai's anger burned against the people, and so Adonai struck down the people with a severe plague. And for that reason, the name of the place was called Kibroth Hata'avah, because they buried the people who were craving. Kibroth Hata'avah, it means graves of lust. Because quite literally, God used their lust to punish them, some of them even unto death. So, what are we supposed to get out of this? And, that was kind of my point from the beginning, right? We'll, work towards it, and then we'll find out how we can apply it. I want to follow King David on this one. And if you're willing to turn there, but in Psalm 78, he recounts this whole grumbling episode. And he has this sort of the morale of it, or the moral of it, not morale, the moral of it a little bit up front. There's plenty of small things, there's plenty of hidden things from these chapters that you can get, and he actually tells you that. He says, I will open my mouth in a parable and will utter dark sayings of old. But there's also some surface level things. And I think one way to just overall apply what he's saying to all of Scripture, but particularly these few chapters, is this. And actually, we've already applied it. Right? In 20 minutes, we applied what King David says to do just by telling the story. And I know I talked about Joshua's really going to blow the lids off of our minds with what he's got coming up, but I just wanted to tell the story. So let's look at what King David says in Psalm 78, and I'll be looking at verse 5. For he established a testimony in Jacob, and he appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that that they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and might not be as their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that set not their hearts right, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. And I encourage the reading of all of this parsha and also Psalm 78 as a really good commentary on chapters 11 and 12 of Numbers. But just want to close up with this. Let's take what we can learn from each parsha, but I wanted to focus on this, and let's be a generation that declares the works of God to our children, that they might set their hope in God, not forget his works, not forget his commandments, but instead honor him and keep his commandments. And with that, I say again, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you very much.